I love puzzle games, big and small, and this list of 32 puzzle games is on the smaller end of the puzzle game spectrum. Think your more budget titles or up to like 12, 15 quid, maybe max. The idea is that I will go through all of these games and tell you what I thought of them, some of the gameplay mechanics, and whether they stayed on my wish list. And spoiler, most of them do. We're kicking off with Tiny Garden, which is less of a puzzle game and more of a vibe. It reminded me of Polly Pocket merged with the Playdate, because you plant these crops in your little tiny plastic garden, and then once you've planted them, you crank the crank on the side, and that takes you through a day-night cycle, and your crops grow. Some of them will then be able to be picked, and then you can merge those seeds together to then get more rarer or complicated seeds to keep your biodiversity of your garden going. But some of those crops will change some of the land around it. So cacti will make some of the land arid, which then means you can't plant some of the other vegetables and fruits, for example. And then some of the seeds can be combined together to then create some of the like furniture or stickers for your garden, and so on and so forth. I've struggled to see how you could lose on this game, but it was definitely a cosy, fun and interesting vibe, and it reminds me of some of those games where you can dip in and out of and just muck about in your garden for a bit and then leave it and come back the next day for 5 minutes. And from that perspective, it was a 2 thumbs up. Next up is one of the very few 3D first-person wandering around puzzle games on this list, called The Art of Reflection. And this game broke my brain, and that's why it's right up front on this list. And I'm only using some of the very early gameplay footage because I don't want to spoil the fun. Because part of the fun of this demo was discovering how the one-trick pony wasn't a one-trick pony all along. The idea is that you're trying to traverse through various different rooms by locking onto red orbs and then teleporting directly to them. But you can only do that if you've got a clear line of sight and can whoosh your way through. And so, because most of the rooms are blocked by walls or like glass panels, what you're doing is picking up and moving around mirrors so that you can get a clear line of sight through the mirror, and then using, almost a bit like viewfinder, the camera pan and zoom to pan in and out. You can then get a clear line of sight and have the view on the screen as if you've just landed right in front of the red orb, and then you can press the teleport button and zoom through to it. It then started to do some weird and wonderful things with it, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and yeah, this was a real surprise and a definite 2 thumbs up from me. Next up is Spreadcheat, which was part comedy, part Excel horror, depending on how you feel about Excel. And the idea is that you're in like a Windows 95 setting with some horrible corporate giants who have totally buggered up their business. But so long as a spreadsheet reads okay, they're totally fine with everything. And so what you're doing is clicking on various different cells in this mini Excel and using it to copy and paste over various other like calculator sum prompts so that you can make the figures reach what the manager says that they should be, so that everything is really fine. There was definitely some hilarious existential crisis comedies, particularly in the little mini games that take on, or the little cutscenes that happen in between each of the puzzles. But this felt really innovative, fresh, unique, interesting and comedic, whilst also taxing my brain because I'm not great at Excel, and this game really showed that. The next game I really enjoyed as well is This Seat Taken? And it's a logic-based game, but very wholesome at the same time to some degree. You're put in different situations, such as trying to get in a taxi or a limo or in the cinema, where you've got lots of people that you need to seat, but you need to satisfy all of their happiness conditions for you to get all of the thumbs up to then complete the game. And so some people will want to sit next to each other, some will want to have a window seat. In the cinema one, there's people that want to eat popcorn and be on their own. There's kids that want to sit with their parents and steal their parents' popcorn. And then when they go, they leave a mess behind, so therefore you don't want someone to sit in a messy seat. There's some who've got people that stink, and so they stink out like around them, and some people don't mind the smell, and other people are like, I don't want to sit next to someone smelly. So you've got to really think about the placement of things. I found this oddly engrossing and really satisfying to play, and I just like the general really simple vibes of it, and it delivered on great gameplay and great puzzle design, so what's not to love? Next up is Projected Dreams, and this game has been kicking around for a little while, I feel, in my head, but the idea is that you've got a nightlight that's shining up into your bedroom wall, and it's almost like it's taking you back to being a child again, and you're going through various photo albums, reliving memories, and what you're doing is using various different toys or objects in your room to put in front of the nightlight so that the shadow then reflects what you're trying to see in the photo on the wall. I quite like the way how the controls allow you to modularly rotate around all of the different shapes from like spinning around in all different axes, and that felt very intuitive. Sometimes though, planting things on top of each other meant that something kind of rocked off to the side and you didn't quite always get 3 stars. But thoroughly enjoyed myself, really enjoyed the setup. I like the narrative that was underpinning all of it too, and it just felt really good fun and reminded me of when I used to make shadow shapes as a kid. Snakeloop is up next, and this is a pocket-sized game about trying to get your snake around to eating itself so it becomes an Ouroboros. And you have to do this by moving around the level in a turn-based way, but as you eat various different plus signs, your snake will grow. There's minus ones which will make it shrink, and then there's other kind of permutations in here too. But you're always trying to work out how you can get your snake to exactly the right length and then be able to wrap yourself around so that you can eat yourself and form that kind of perfect loop, rather than kind of butting in halfway through, always being like maybe 1 square too short. The level design looks really simple on the surface, but I kept on finding myself going around in circles quite quickly. And yeah, I found this quite a meaty, teethy one to get into and subverts the general snakeness that you get from Snake games. So it was a thumbs up from me. Continuing on the interesting constraints in a game that then make the puzzle designs harder is Bento Blocks. And Bento Blocks is a fit the bento in the bento box game, and there's already a game like this out called Bento already, which I absolutely love, but this has a very different take on it. You can't rotate the blocks, and you're only given a certain amount of moves to chop up what you're given with knives, and those knives will be of different sizes and different orientations. And so what you're trying to do is place the blocks in the right place with the right sizes so that you can then make that single like knife chop to then pick up the blocks and then put it in the bento box properly. Once you get your head around how this game is set up, the puzzles are actually quite fiendish and difficult, but rewarding to get right, because you're having to like eye up how big like or long the rice block is so that you can then get it right, so to speak. And that was good fun. I did run into a bug with this demo though, where the entire thing froze after about the first 7 levels, and I never did get it running again. So just bear in mind, if you're diving into this demo, you might run into the same issue. But fundamentally, great game, stays on my wish list. Next up is a game called Cipheur, which is all about deciphering cipher code. So a very simple game, and there's quite a few that are out already that do a very similar thing. This again takes famous quotes that you then have to decode as you go along, and whilst the aesthetic isn't quite as strong as Prose and Codes, for example, which is one of my favourites of these types of games, there wasn't anything particularly wrong with Cipheur. It just wasn't quite as good as something that I've already bought. I've kept it on my wish list because there's still plenty of time for polish. This is probably one of my weaker recommendations on this list. The Electrifying Incident, a monster mini-expedition, is like a little mini bonus side game that's totally standalone from the excellent A Monster's Expedition. And this sees you trying to navigate around a giant electrical warehouse thing, moving blocks, opening doors, trying to survive various different electrified traps to get your monster from A to B by the end of the game. What I really like about this is that it starts off with a very simple Sokoban style push the block, try and pick up the block and work your way around very tight corridors scenario. But your extendable grabber to try and get all of the blocks to then put them in the right places can get bent and then get all out of shape, and that's part of the level design as well. The demo is exceptionally short, and so very quick gameplay here because it was over within a couple of minutes. But what it did do was whet my appetite for the full game when it comes out later on this year, and I can't wait to get stuck in. Next on the list is Kaskade, which is almost like a automation belt type game, but it doesn't look or feel like it, and I must apologise, it took me a while to click with this game, which is why the gameplay footage is probably going to be underwhelming and quite rubbish. The idea with Kaskade is that you've got various different coloured blobs that are starting to appear from the top of the screen, and you need to be able to steer them in the right way to get to the blobs at the bottom. The more and more different layers of different coloured blobs that start to appear, the more complicated your system becomes, because everything starts to cross over, and that means that you need to either buy some jump buttons to then be able to enable one belt to jump over another, or it might be that you need to do a boost and combine things. There's lots of different unlockables, and the more that you play and the more points you get, the more things that you start to unlock. So there's a little bit of a roguelike element in there too, or a roguelite element in there. But there were lots of different level designs, each with their own leaderboards, trying to see how long and far you can survive. It was just a really interesting setup. It took me a while to get used to it though, and I must say that the control scheme was not working for me very well at all, because it didn't seem to register some of my inputs, which then meant that I kept hitting game overs quite quickly. But fundamentally, I was really enjoying the experience, and if the controls can just be a little bit more precise and it's easier for me to spot that it's actually taken on board what I've done, then Kaskade would be a definite recommendation. The next game is Palm Cracker, and this brings you back to a handheld palm device for you to then crack various different codes inside, so clues in the title. A lot of these were weird Cipheur-y style games, and you had to dive into various different apps and try and work out how you was going to solve different puzzles by getting into some of the info and looking at some of the saved documents and some of the entries in the contacts lists. It was like an overarching little mini detective game. I really liked the aesthetic of this. I did have some problems with this demo constantly crashing, so you've got very limited gameplay footage, but I liked what I found here, and it whet my appetite for a mini palm detective game to enjoy when this comes out later on in the year. Zavod is up next, and this is another standout for me actually, and I didn't expect it was going to be. It's an automated production line style game where you need to turn on and off various different grabber devices that will then grab various objects and then spin around and drop it on a different belt. And you need to work out which ones to turn on and off and at what times, because you're trying to get these different objects into their rightful bins to then burn to turn into this red horrible blood energy, which then makes the Zavod engine turn on more and more, and you go to the next level. Where I really liked this game was that each level in this demo kept adding on something new for me to consider. And I was at the point where you have various different belts that all are set up like a little mini maze, but you needed to take the longest way around quite often because you needed to convert squares to circles or into triangles, and then work out that the triangles and the circles need to go on different belts to then get into the right areas. So it just was a really well thought out puzzle game that has a quite beautiful minimalistic design. So yeah, 2 thumbs up for Zavod, one of my favourites on this list. Switching gears slightly is Spire Blast, and this is a Boom Blocks-like game, but also as a match 3. And so what you're doing is firing blocks of certain colours into the spire to then knock out all of the related blocks. So if you hit a yellow block, any yellow blocks touching it will then disappear too. And then the physics of it will then crash down around anything that's was being held up by those yellow blocks. There are lots of other things involved in this game too, and I did struggle with some of the controls to be able to rotate the spire around so that I could hit from different angles. But fundamentally, I was very much enjoying myself. I'm a sucker for these types of physics games at best anyway. And this was adding lots of other things into the mix, like feeding a dragon a certain amount of blocks, or being able to vanish or get rid of certain types of colour blocks to a certain limit to therefore get your 3 stars. And so, yeah, really enjoyed this one. Definitely for the casual fans. But, yeah, nothing wrong about that at all. Thumbs up. Will be definitely on my wish list and probably a day one. Place Icebergs apart reminds me of games where you've got to place various different tessellated hexagons together to try and fill in a pattern of like a stained glass window or something like that. But the interesting thing here is that each of the things that you need to place in the level can't touch each other, and there must be a gap between it because they're all icebergs and they have to be placed apart. This kind of rewiring of my brain made some of these puzzles quite interesting. But yeah, this was a nice, simple, casual puzzle game that I blasted through the demo relatively quickly on, and depending on the price point would stay on my wish list for a quick buy. Perhaps a more novel game is Bilingual Crosswords, and I had great fun with this one. And it took me back to trying to relearn GCSE French, because it's been many, many years since I tried it. And yes, I failed miserably, but I had great fun trying it out with Bilingual Crosswords. The idea behind this is that you pick one language that you're fluent in and then the language that you want to learn, and you can mix and match lots of different ones. And then the clues are in the language you know, but the crossword is in the language you're trying to learn. And I found it actually really started to jog my memory on words that I'd totally forgotten from French beforehand, and was like, I remember, and was like started to type it all in. And sometimes just getting a few letters in then kind of is enough to trigger that old memory from years and years ago to get me back going again. If you struggle to get through some of that kind of crosswordy clues, you can turn on a mode where actually you're given a lot of the words up front and then it's working out where to put them in, and that can help you too. And there's also a teacher mode that just allows you to just see everything so that you can then kind of learn the words in a more visual way, for example. But I thought this was a great novel idea, and looking through the demo there was loads of different languages in there that I feel like Bilingual Crosswords could be really heavily expanded into. And so fantastic concept, really ingenious, and 2 thumbs up. I love language games, and this is a great variation on a twist. We move from words to photos now and pictures with Instance, which is a photo booking scrapbook puzzle game where members of your family and other people will start to give you photos for you to create photo books for them. And the puzzle is trying to arrange the photos in the right order so that they tell the correct timeline. So one might be that you've got like your grandmother meets your grandfather, goes on dates, he proposes, they get married, then she's pregnant, then she's had the child, which is then your mum. And you're trying to arrange those photos in the right order so that they tell the story in the photo book. Once you've done that, you can then decorate some of the photo book with some stickers and some like colory pens around it so that you can tart it up a little bit. But the fundamental puzzle was an interesting one and gave me that cute, wholesome vibe. And I think maybe I'm more receptive to this at the moment because I've been going through my mum's little family tree history book that she made for us several years ago, and just kind of reminiscing about generations before. So Instance hit home for me from that perspective, and it's definitely staying on my wish list. The second and final 3D puzzle game on this list is Lingo 2, and I struggled with this one, and it's mainly because it doesn't explain its gameplay mechanics at all, or what it is you're trying to do. And when it does that on top of an abstract world, it really sets the player up for a bit of a struggle, and you have to have good perseverance basically to kind of make it all start to click. Once it did start to click, I got the hang of it, but it still wasn't a massive hook for me initially. And the idea is that you're using various different stone tablets to link them up so that it will say like the word world, and then it will say -1. So then you might put the word word on, and then it'll go bing, and then you'll have to find the other like flip side variant of this and then kind of mix and match the word and the world stone tablets together. But you're doing that inside an abstract 3D puzzler that will throw in like a hedge maze or like a gravity spinning room that you're trying to get round to even get to these stones to begin with. I quite like the idea and the premise of it. It was just really hard to click with something that's got multiple layers of abstract gameplay mechanics all happening at once without any explanation. And so I prefer my games with a little bit more scaffolding around them, at least at the beginning, to set me off. And then I can be like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Blobun is next, and this is a very simple but quite endearing colour all of the blocks without running into yourself game, if you know what I mean. And so what you're doing is working out the way to get into every single square by dragging your slime around behind you, and it started to introduce like portals and other different gameplay mechanics to consider, so that you end up making sure that you hit every square before then completing the whole level and covering it with slime. There was nothing new here, but what was here was well done, and so it stays on my wish list because it's going to be one of those cheaper, cheerfuler Steam puzzle games that comes out that I think I would quite happily spend several hours just enjoying for light puzzle entertainment. Talking of lights, here's Leadlight, the next game on this list. Who doesn't love a segue? And this is a design and colour mixing game. You're given a design of various lights in different formations and different colour shades, and you're given a selection of colour panels that are only primary colours. And what you're doing is working out how to rearrange and slot in all of these different colour panes so that they can A, make the shape that you're trying to make, but B, overlay them in a way that then means that blue and yellow make green, for example, and therefore you can have the green shades in the right place. And so it's a little bit of mixing and matching. It's a little bit of colour theory in here as well. Oddly, very relaxing and actually quite a joy to play, whilst also making me scratch my head a few times, because each of the colour slides that you're trying to merge in is usually a 3x3 square, so you can't just rearrange it nicely or rotate things around how you want. You have to think about how you layer things on top of each other, and that was the key to making Leadlight an intriguing and engaging puzzle game. Romance could be in the air if you're playing Couple Maker, which is the latest game on this list, and this is an intriguing one that I largely enjoyed until a gameplay mechanic came along that really done my head in, and I just couldn't get the hang of it. And the idea behind this is that you've got a board with lots of people sitting on the periphery, and they're of different colours, and you're trying to get like a red and a blue person together so that they can become a couple. And you do this by placing down various markers, because one side of the couple will just keep walking forward until they hit a marker and then turn. And that was working fine until we got these like rotation buttons that came in. And for the love of God, whatever way I thought that the person was going to turn, it always went the other way. And so it completely fumbled any of my like design theory of how I was going to get to the end of lots of these puzzles, and I just struggled a little bit. Beyond that specific mechanic though, I was enjoying myself and it stayed on my wish list, but yeah, for some reason I was just having a mental block on that very specific gameplay mechanic. So my advice to the developer, if they ever watch this, is please could you include some more instructions about how the rotating mechanic works, because Simon was having a thick moment. The next game on this list is one that didn't survive the cut and is removed from my wish list, but it's called Rave. And I thought going in this was going to be quite Boggle-esque, but it ended up being a game that felt too random and not enough skill involved for it to be a true puzzle game for me. In Rave, you have grids of letters. You start off with a 3x3 grid, then it graduates you to 4x4, 5x4, 5x5, and inside this grid, you are constantly rotating around the letters and then picking various letters to make the bubbles burst, and then new letters come in. As you rotate round letters or bubble burst them, you're then matching letters to make words. And in the 3x3, you're looking for 3-letter words. In the 4x4, it's 4. In the 4x5, it's 4 or 5, for example. But because you're constantly rotating and popping things, it felt more like a panic arcade game where you're hoping that you get the luck of the draw. It didn't feel very skill dependent for me at all. And so it just kind of made me go, I don't like it. And yeah, I had quite a visceral negative reaction to this one. That doesn't mean the game won't be fun for other people, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. And perhaps it was me being clouded by thinking it was going to be quite Boggle-esque. Maybe is what did it in for me. But no, Word Rave did not stay on my wish list, unfortunately. We're going super minimalistic for the next game, called Quadphos, which reminded me of Minesweeper and Nurikabe. And the idea behind this is you're given a grid-based level design, and inside some of the squares you'll have some numbers, and the number equates to how many squares surrounding it should be turned on, for want of a better phrase, like lit up. And so if it's got a 1, then it will just be the 1 square. If it's got 4, it needs to be the 4. And obviously the way how the levels are designed, it means that you're having to really pick and choose what gets turned on where to make sure that you satisfy all of the conditions. I quite enjoy very simple minimalistic puzzle games like this when they're quite heavily in the logic sphere. And so Quadphos scratched an itch for me that I quite enjoyed. And so looking forward to this coming out later in 2025. No puzzle game is free without having a jigsaw on there, and Kintsugi, A Journey Through the Broken Pieces, is that game. And once again, I'm in this 3D puzzle world trying to put back together things, and the controls just don't cut it. I don't know what it is with 3D puzzle games where I'm trying to put things back together, but whatever control scheme I end up having, whether it's with mouse and keyboard or controller, they all have the same problems of a total lack of precision. And the only time I've ever seen this work is in VR, because you have the ability to rotate something around and you get a depth perception of where your hands are going to put the 3D piece of the jigsaw in the right place. And Kintsugi struggles with that because you're constantly rotating something around with a piece in that's trying to work out where in the depth of field you're trying to put it, and mouse and controller just didn't cut it at all, and certainly not keyboard either. And so this became really frustrating, despite the fact that you're sat in a Zen garden with nice Zen spa music going on in the background. I was raging. And so this has stayed on my wish list for now, but I wouldn't recommend it until something is done with that control scheme, because it was pretty poor. Talking of pause, we've got Cat at Home up next, and this is a merger of a 2D platform puzzle game and a point-and-click puzzle game, but something felt off for me during the entire time I played it. The cat's movement is really stilted, and it was quite difficult to know what it could and couldn't jump on, and that's because there was very little to point out what you could and couldn't jump on in the graphic design. I quite like the way how all of the different animals have got different personalities, and actually the characterization of the cat and the different animals that you talk to in the demo were spot on and engaging. But yeah, something just didn't click with me with this, and it's difficult to put my finger on it. And I just think I didn't feel very engaged with the puzzles. I found it quite lethargic to play, and whilst I think actually quite a lot of other people will enjoy this, this is just one of those ones where it's down to personality and it's not for me. And so it's not on my wish list, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a poor or bad game necessarily. It just didn't gel with me personally. Next up on the list is logic game Dotu, or Dotu. And the idea behind this is quite simple. You've got horizontal and vertical rules of how many dots can be in that specific lane. But you're only given certain types of dots, or dice, as I was starting to refer them to in the game, to drop in certain places. And so you've got to make sure it all works out, because it might be that you've got to have 5 dots in a line, but you've got, say, 3 squares to put them in, but you can only put in a 0, a 1 or a 3, for example. And so you're working out how to put them in the right places so that the logic works both horizontally and vertically too. The demo was quite genteel in the way how it introduced lots of different mechanics, but I found it quite nice and chill for a very simple puzzle game. It'd probably be one of those games that I kind of pick up and play for the casual audience out there rather than the hardcore puzzlers, which is largely what most of these games are in this list. Next on the list is Urban Jungle, and this game left me totally 50-50, and I still don't know what I make of it or think about it. In Urban Jungle, your goal is to put down as many different pot plants in a 3D environment as possible so that they score as many points as possible. And each pot plant has like a need for, does it want water? Does it want sunlight? Does it want to be near some of its kind? Or does it like to be near other pot plants? Or does it hate some of them? And depending on where you put it in the vicinity of where they're put, will then give them points for scoring. That then allows you to then earn coins, which allows you to then buy more pot plants to keep going. So it's a bit like a Doth Romantic style thing where you have to reach a certain level of points to then unlock some more plants to keep going. But it kind of felt like a weird just keep shushing stuff around until it gets in the right place and then you score the points, et voila, you finish the level. And it didn't follow much logic. I ended up storing half of my plants under a sofa. It was very strange. And so it just didn't quite feel fully fleshed out for me about the laws of what you can and can't do. And I felt like I was breaking the game constantly by just doing what it allowed me to do. And so that's why I kind of came away from Urban Jungle feeling very 50-50. I quite like the concept though. So it stayed on my wish list, but I'm just super confused by it. And I don't know if I'll ever actually really genuinely buy it. What puzzle game list is complete without some kind of railway track game? And that's where Trackastophe comes in. I really like the cartoon style graphics of this as the train lays down its tracks with its hands right in front of it. And what was interesting with Trackastophe is that you're laying down various different prompts so that you could then point the train to go in the right direction. But some of the prompts are already in place. And so what starts out looking like a very simple puzzle design actually ends up meaning you're having to go like a really long or strange way around the level to satisfy making sure that you can get to the end with the pieces that you're given. And so that was where Trackastophe's level design really shone for me versus it ever feeling unique or interesting, because there's so many train track games that are out there already that do those types of games very well. It was nice to see this game take a different approach to it, and I appreciated that. Technically, I could have put Piece by Piece in the 2D adventure and platforming list that's coming out later this week, but I wanted to put Piece by Piece here because it was fundamentally a puzzle game, just with lots of 2D platforming involved. In this game, all of your levels are broken up into jigsaw pieces for you to rearrange how you see fit. And sometimes, as you get further into the game, actually different puzzle pieces have different slots so that they can only go in certain orders. But as you move around as the character, you're trying to work out how you can then pick up their piece and move it around so that they can get access to new areas, or maybe you need to kind of flip and move things around in the middle of a jump, or put a new floor in underneath so that they then fall through to the next puzzle piece. And that's why I'm feeling like this feels more puzzly than 2D platformy, but you will need both skills at the same time, and timing plays a big part in this game. I found this idea fascinating and really innovative. I've not seen something go this hard in let's break up your game into a jigsaw puzzle and see how you can kind of put it all back together again. And so it was a real refreshing treat and really made me scratch my brain an awful lot just getting through the demo, let alone actually getting into the main game itself. Next up is Blueprint Bob, and I enjoyed this game before it kept crashing on me and then the demo kind of fell over. So the idea behind this is that you're using various different pieces to then try and get Bob to platform up to reach a certain height. And depending on how you stack all of the different objects and arrange them will then mean that if you get like a pass mark or a gold star mark. I quite enjoyed the concept of this. It was simple. It reminded me of Flash games from the early 2000s, which is no bad thing. I just found that actually from a control perspective and a demo perspective, sometimes it wasn't very nice to me and it kept crashing. So very limited gameplay footage here, but I liked what I saw. With 3 to go, next up is Replicube, which is a fascinating and unique programming game, which is asking you to program in voxel-based designs to match what has been put in front of you. And so Replicube will start off with a voxel design of different colours and shapes where the voxels will be in a 3D space. And then it will start to teach you how to code to replicate the voxels in the right X, Y and Z axis with the right colours so that you can then create the right cubes. And it starts to teach you different like command statements as you go through the demo itself. I found this fascinating. I needed to spend more time with it so that I could then feel fully fledged in like going, ta-da, look at what I'm creating. But just scratching the surface made me go, ooh, this is going to be one of those weird puzzle designy type games where you could go off and do your own weird and creative thing with it, as well as solving the little, almost like game jam challenges that are taking place within the game itself, all set inside a retro Windows theme, which I quite appreciated too. I really enjoyed this one. It's a little hidden gem, and it's from LBRY, who produces fantastic games all the time, so it's always going to be a day one buy for me, even if this is totally different to anything else that LBRY has published before. The penultimate game on this list is called Wet, which I thought was going to be something like a Wet Trick style game, or maybe from Dust, where you're trying to sculpt the land around you so that you can change the flow of water to do various different things. And that might very well be what the game's about, but the demo was so impenetrable that I genuinely have no idea what on earth I was supposed to be doing, how to do it, and what on earth was going on. The controls were so obtuse that the visual cue to tell you what you was raising and lowering on the land was in a different place to where my control actually was and what I was doing. It gave no feedback on what you was trying to do in the game at all and whether it was positive or negative. And I was doing all kinds of weird and wonderful things with the landscape to try and change the water flow, and nothing happened. And so after a few minutes I was just so like, what on earth is this? I uninstalled it, it's off my wish list, and that's a shame because there might be something good here, but no one will have a clue if you don't give your demo any kind of context, instructions, or even have like the very basics of control schemes and visual design mapping together. And so this is an example of a demo that just doesn't work. And then, very sadly, to go out on a whimper, Variable Puzzle is the final game on this list, which also didn't make my wish list. This is a mixture of Chinese proverbs turned into light puzzles, which was enough for me to be like, good idea, let's take a look. But actually, in actuality, the designs of the puzzles were a bit obtuse and a bit strange. It seemed to want to ask you to kind of move around in space to turn on various different lights by hitting switches and then collecting various lights and bringing up a light meter. But depending on the like proverb or the puzzle that you was trying to solve, sometimes you didn't need to turn on all the lights, sometimes you did. And I got quite bored of it quite quickly, and the controls were a bit weird and wonky, and the game kept crashing. So I decided that actually maybe that was a proverb in itself to not continue pursuing something that doesn't fulfill you. And so I uninstalled it and removed it from my wish list. And that is 32 puzzle games previewed from Steam Next Fest 2025 February edition. I hope that was helpful and interesting and that you found some new ones for your wish list. Very much on the casual vibe for most of these games, I must admit, but there's some good classics in there and some good ones that I'll be picking up on release for myself. So thanks for watching. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.